Office for Civil Rights. So you can see some of the data there that they had collected on this and what the rates are. Lots of different ways in which you can think about bias and how bias plays out. Things like research that was done by Russell Skiba, elementary school age children and middle school children. And in the study that he did, he had data regarding their age and grade level and gender and race and ethnicity, and he knew the behavioral infraction. What did the child do wrong? And then he knew what happened to the child as a result of that. What he did was he had this data, masked up all the other data, except for just the behavioral infraction, just the description of what the child did. Gave it to a bunch of teachers, had them rate the severity of it. How bad is this really, if this were to happen in your classroom? Then unmasked the data, analyzed the data, and found out that even when you look at the same level of severity of the behavior problem, when you compare children, the black child is more likely to be sent to the principal's office than the white child, more likely to be suspended, more likely to be expelled, even when the behaviors are the same. And when they started controlling for socioeconomic status, even though socioeconomic status matters in the equation, race still mattered on top of it all. It's not just about socioeconomic status. It's about race, too. You cannot take race out of the equation. Philip Goff and some folks have done some other studies where they were looking at descriptions of children's behaviors, and they provided this description maybe of a child's behavior, a child who may or may not have done the bad deed, may or may not have broken the vase, may or may not have lost the ball. Had people, adults, rate how guilty do you think the child is? Do you think the child really did it? Or do you think the child didn't do it? And they showed them different pictures of children, some black, some white, some boys, some girls. And whenever they showed them the picture of a black boy, the guilty rating went up. It's the same story. It's the same story. But if there's a black male face that's put with it, it just seems a little guiltier. And so that's what they had found. Oh, and all the children in the study were between the ages of 10 and 17 in the pictures. At the end, they asked people to guess how old these children were. They overestimated the age of the black children on average by about 4.5 years. And these children were between the ages of 10 and 17. That's a lot of overestimating when you're talking about children. Feeling less pain. Lots of studies showing that even young children, this is a study by Dorr, pulled in 5-year-old children, 7-year-old children, 10-year-old children, had them rate pain, rate how much something might hurt. Pretend you stubbed your toe. How much would it hurt? You bit your tongue, hit your head. And at 5 years old, they didn't find any differences. But by the time the children were 7 years old, whenever they asked them to rate how much something would hurt and showed them a picture of a black boy and asked how much it would hurt that black boy, the children thought that it would hurt that black boy less than it would hurt them if they weren't black, and less than it would hurt another child. And by the time the children were 10 years old, it was a robust finding. Now, there's not a lot of things that we know enough about when it comes to our preschool teachers and child care providers. We need to learn a whole lot more. But one thing that I know for a fact is this. Every one of our preschool and child care providers in America, they are all older than 7. Every single one of them. And if we're carrying this in us by the time we're 7 years old, then can you just imagine how much more there will be left in there? This is a video clip that we showed some teachers. And when we showed the teachers this video clip, we asked them to look at the video clip and identify challenging behaviors. See how many behavior problems you can find, and can you find evidence that a behavior problem is going to happen really soon? And we had an eye tracker attached to them. And the eye tracker, you can see here in this video, you can see there's somebody, a teacher getting ready to do the eye tracking exam. You'll see a little black bar at the bottom of the screen. That's an eye tracker. It tells us down to the pixel on the screen in a thousandth of a second exactly where the teacher's looking. There's a research assistant. You can see she's looking at the exact same thing. That yellow dot is where that teacher's looking at that specific moment. Now, what we did was we told the teachers, look for challenging behaviors. But what we didn't tell them is the truth. And the truth is this. There's no behavior problems in any of these videos because they are all child actors that I hired to sit at a table and play with Play-Doh. One of them was a black boy, one was a black girl, one was a white boy, white girl. And what I'm really interested in is not how fast can you find behavior problems, because there aren't any to find. What I'm interested in is when I lead you to believe somebody's going to misbehave, who do you look at? Who do you look at first? Who do you look at longest? Who do you keep going back to? In other words, if you were a mall cop, who would you be following at the Gap right now? That's basically what we were doing. And what we found was this. At the end of the study, we showed them the pictures of the 4 children, and we said, which child do you think you had to watch the most? And then the screen went blank, and we asked them, put in the letter of the child that you feel you had to watch the most. Now, we didn't need to ask them who they watched the most. I know down to the thousandth of a second who you watched. What we're curious about is this. When I lead you to believe that somebody's going to misbehave, where do your biases take your eyes? And then at this point, are you aware of where your biases took your eyes? And then later, after that, are you willing to admit it? And what we basically found was that teachers spend more time looking at the black child when we lead them to believe that somebody's going to misbehave. And that's true for white teachers, and it's true for black teachers too. But they think they have a boy bias. They think they spend more time looking at boys, especially the black boy. But the reality is they spend more time looking at black children, especially the black boy. So there's biases there. But for teachers, they might be perceiving it as a somewhat different bias, a somewhat more socially acceptable boys will be boys kind of bias. You can see what it looks like here in terms, each one of those dots is where a teacher's looking.
There's a new study out of the Yale Child Study Center that I had to read a few times just to believe what it was telling me. The researchers recruited about 135 preschool teachers. They had them watch video footage of 4 kids playing, a black boy, a black girl, a white boy, and a white girl. And they told the teachers, their subjects, watch the video, there may be some challenging behaviors. As soon as you see something that could become challenging, hit the enter key on your keypad. Well, here's the trick. There was no challenging behavior. The researchers were using eye scan technology to see which child the teachers were looking at the most. And what they found is that the teachers, both white and black alike, spent the most time watching the black boy, waiting for bad behavior that never came. There's one more really interesting headline in this study, which comes later. The teachers were also given a 1-paragraph description to read of a hypothetical child with a stereotypical name who behaves pretty badly in class, pushes, scratches, throws toys. And some of the teachers were also given some biographical information that helped make sense of that behavior. They were told that the child lives with his mother, father has been in and out for years, they're relatively poor, the mother is depressed, works 3 jobs. Researchers wanted to know if knowing this information made the teachers more empathetic to the kid. Well, here's the shock. It did, but only if the teacher and the child were of the same race. If the teacher and the child, a white teacher and a black child, or even a black teacher and a white child, knowing that biographical information, those teachers were less empathetic towards those students. And here's why this matters. Imagine if this is true, if there's this empathy deficit in preschool, well, imagine where else that's true.
We work with NPR a lot when we try to push out the messages from some of the studies that we do because we think that it's important for people other than researchers to be able to actually read some of these findings. One other study that I'll tell you about really quickly before I wrap up is another study by some colleagues at University of Washington. What they were studying was this. When you give preschoolers a video of 2 adults interacting, and in one set of videos, the person's leaning in and smiling. And in another set of videos, the person's leaning back and not smiling at the person. And you change the shirt that's on the other person. And then you ask these preschoolers, 3 or 4-year-old children, which person do you think was the nice one? If they saw the video where the person wearing the blue shirt was being interacted with in a friendly way, they assumed that that person was a nice person. And if they saw a video where the person was leaning back and the person had a green shirt on, and they thought, well, that person's not a nice person. And that makes a lot of sense. But where it gets really interesting is this. They then showed them pictures of people that weren't in the study who just happened to be wearing blue shirts or green shirts. And if they'd been exposed to a video where somebody was interacting positively with a person with a green shirt on, the next time they saw a person with a green shirt, even though they'd never seen that person before, they thought, that person is a nice person too. And if they saw negative interactions, they thought that person's not a nice person also. In other words, what they did with preschoolers is they, in just a couple of minutes, created a shirt bias. And if we can do that with preschoolers in just a couple of minutes, imagine what we can do with skin tone and how quickly we can do it. The findings that we had concern me. These findings right here scare the hell out of me, because it basically tells us that if we don't get on top of this, we're really going to be hurting our kids. I gave a talk like this once in Las Vegas, and when I was talking there, I sat down after the talk and everything, and then the MC, you can see the MC on the right there, brought a little girl up on the stage. I didn't know there was any children in the audience, and brought this little girl up and asked her what she thought about what was happening at the conference and what she'd seen. I didn't know there was any kids there, and I'm keenly aware of the fact that when I'm talking about these things, I'm really not talking about my daughter. I'm talking about other people's children and how people view other people's children. But I didn't really know that I was going to be talking to one of those children there. And so she was up on the stage, and the person asked, what did you make of this? And I'm sitting on like every word, because I'm honestly just very, very concerned about what she's going to say, and it really worried me. And so she asked her that, and then the little girl said, well, I remember the professor guy talking about how teachers view children. And then she said, and boy, at that point, I'm really listening, like every word she's saying. And then the MC asked her, well, what did you make of that? And she said, well, me and my friends, we already knew it. We just didn't think you all did. And that's when I decided I'm not going to quit talking about this. I was worried that we were talking about something that was going to upset her. She already knew it. She knew it way before I knew it. She knew it way before I ever discovered it. So why should we care about children being expelled from preschool programs? When you think about it, social justice and civil rights are often matters of access. It's about getting in something. It's also about making sure you're not kicked out of something. It's about making sure you have a seat on the bus, or it can be about a seat at a deli counter. It can be about a seat at the place at the voting polls. It can be about a seat in higher education or in elementary school. But it's not just about getting in the front door. It's about making sure you're not pushed out the back door, too.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you, Bob.
Thank you.
Thank you. Margaret?
Good morning. Because we're really still down in terms of our time, I'm going to forego my slides because I think it's very important, given Dr. Gilliam's wonderful presentation, that I leave you with an important message in terms of adolescence. On the one hand, as Dr. Gilliam's remarks shared, young children are at a particular developmental period in terms of size, in terms of how they think, etc. So in many ways, the issues of their treatment and their experiences really have to do with the context, the nature of the socialization agents that support their development. What happens at home, how we speak to our children in terms of preparing them for this world. And so in many ways, in terms of, although kids are exposed to these messages, what's really important in terms of what happens those first 7 years is that youngsters don't internalize what it means for the self, because they are cognitively self-centered. Not the kind of narcissism that we see in Washington. But I'm talking about a normal human development quality of thought that's appropriate for kids through age 7. But when I began talking about adolescence, that's a very different developmental period. I happen to love adolescence. Why I love adolescence? Because I consider that developmental period as representing the last bastion of truth. And then we learn to lie. And we lie most often about the experience of injustice. Well, in the first 7 years of life, ways of thinking represent a certain level of maturation. But just think about this. 10 years later, when they're no longer 7 and they're 17, and they have the height, they have the build, and they have the ways of thinking and the capacity to reflect on that thinking in terms of the self, then it's a very different situation. And without our acknowledging that in terms of how we teach kids, what we model for our adolescents, it means then that very often they take it upon themselves to make sense of the world, to make sense of a world of injustice. When being an American, a